set. I'm adjusting. I was breathing, I could hear my breath. I was like, that's not right, but I guess maybe it's fine. Okay. Caleb says not to touch it. Don't touch it, and I'm touching it obsessively. I'll stop touching it. Well, good welcome everyone, and good evening, and thank you for coming again in such numbers for our summer series called Art in Florence. And I see lots of familiar faces, so you know that I have a background in art history, and I teach occasionally at the university here. And so this is part of our broader educational program here at the gallery. But Caleb and I were just in Florence together for a little bit, so I had a chance to see some work that I hadn't seen in a few years, and I'll tell you about it tonight. But some paintings that I just kind of didn't pay any attention to, I dismissed. Botticelli, I'll admit, I thought he was really boring for years and years. And it wasn't until this trip I was like, Botticelli, he does doing something. There's something really, really interesting going on in his work. So yes, so you're probably my first group to hear me talk about Botticelli. I would just skip on by Botticelli heading to Leonardo. So, but I'm transformed from this last trip. Housekeeping things. Oh yes. All of our lectures are filmed, and Caleb edits them and posts them on our website and our YouTube channel, just a few days after the lecture. And they're all available for free. He's walking ominously towards me, checking the sound. No, we're good. And as you know, as usual, we have a donation bucket at the front, and your donations go into funding the research and keeping this lecture series accessible. All right. So tonight, as you know, we'll be talking about Botticelli, and we'll be spending the majority of the evening focusing on two of his most famous works, which are housed in the Uffizi collection. And this is the Uffizi Gallery. Caleb took this photo from across the river. For those of you who know, the lineup is always snaking around the courtyard. Horrific lineup to get into the Uffizi. If you want to know how to skip the lines and tackle all of the museum spaces and art galleries in Florence, you can listen to my last lecture for my pro tips. But this is the Uffizi Gallery here, where the bulk of Botticelli's work is housed. And why I had this kind of, I think, this Botticelli transformation. This was the Botticelli Room in the Uffizi. It was horrific. It was just horrific. Does anyone remember, like, pre-2016 going to the Uffizi and seeing the Botticellis? This was the room, a very high ceiling. The lighting was terrible. They had this horrible brown floor. It was a poor traffic flow. There was always a cluster around the Birth of Venus. I think the Primavera is a little more interesting, so you can go aim for the Primavera and ignore the Birth of Venus. But anyway, it was a horrible room. I always was skipping by it on my way to go look at the Leonardo. So I was like, come on, Caleb, let's head off to get to the Leonardo room. Don't dawdle. But the Uffizi Gallery has undergone a magnificent renovation over the last kind of 5 or 6 years, and they've done it all without disrupting the flow of traffic, so you can still see the work. It's been a really masterful renovation, I think. And they've unveiled a few years ago the new Botticelli rooms, I should say. So they've subdivided that horrific room, this one, into some smaller chambers. And the lighting, there's natural light coming from above, and really, really good lighting coming from the sides of the paintings. And you can really see and get up close, and you can see the Primavera and the Birth of Venus in a much more intimate way. And the lighting is so good. Lighting makes such a difference. And you're not quite so kind of feeling like you're being herded around the room like a cattle. There's a bit of, you can have a moment or two with the Botticellis. Then this is looking into the Birth of Venus. So they're great sight lines now at the Uffizi. So here I am. This is our last trip, getting a good look at the Primavera. And this is just, again, like a testament to good museum design. So this is in June. It was at the height of the tourism season in Florence, and we could get up pretty close to a couple of the most famous works in the Uffizi collection, just because of the way the room was designed. So I'd highly recommend. I'd recommend a trip to Florence just because the Uffizi has been renovated. And I was completely undone. I was like, oh, Botticelli. I just, like I said, I never found him all that captivating for I shouldn't say for reasons I'll discuss tonight. Reasons tonight, I'm going to tell you why he's interesting. But no, I found he was part of a poetic current in the Florentine Renaissance. And I was much more interested in kind of the scientific current. So artists like Leonardo and Verrocchio, which I'll kind of tell you about the differences between them. But that current kind of captivated me a little more than Botticelli's. I thought it was too lyrical, too dainty. But by getting up close, there are these details and the diaphanous of the drapery and the flow of the lines and the attention to detail, and it's like a poem. It's this visual poem. You're descending into another world. So the two main paintings we'll be talking about tonight, as I said, are the Primavera. So executed sometime between 1480 and 85. And this is Tempera on panel, and you'll see this will pop up again and again tonight. Both of the pieces, the Botticelli, or the Birth of Venus and the Primavera, are Tempera on panel. And Tempera is egg yolk. It's egg yolk mixed with the pigment, and then that's applied to the canvas, and it renders very bright colors, which we see with Botticelli. We associate with Botticelli. The use of tempera paint slowly declined towards the high Renaissance. If you think of the later Renaissance artists like Raphael and Leonardo, they drifted more towards oil paint. So tempera fell out of fashion. It's very difficult to use. Oil paint will stay good in the tube or good on your palette for a while. It won't rot. So tempera is a little challenging to manage. But it lasts very well. It sustains very well as a paint, as a pigment, as color. These are large works. You can see from this is me, and then this is it's 2 meters or so by 3 meters. And then of course probably his most famous painting, The Birth of Venus, which is executed, we believe, after the Primavera, so 84, 85. And this time it's tempera on canvas. It was probably some kind of banner, so something that was waved about in kind of processions, which is like, devastating to artists. Right? Like, oh, it was moved and taken out of its, perfect encased, temperature-controlled space. The Birth of Venus is slightly smaller, so it's not quite 2 meters by 3 meters. And I'll come back to these, and we'll talk about these in detail as we go forward. So this is what we think is a self-portrait of Botticelli. This is a detail from the Adoration of the Magi. So part of a larger piece, but we believe that this was a self-portrait that he tucked into the painting. And his dates are 1445 to 1510. So he was really, his life is encapsulated. The entirety of the Florentine Renaissance, I think, like Botticelli existed for, and then his death really signified the dwindling or the tail end of the Florentine Renaissance, which we'll talk about. He worked with and apprenticed with and worked in the studio of an artist named look at autocorrect. It did that. Fra Filippo. It's Fra Filippo Lippi. Autocorrect's just undermining me at every turn. Fra Filippo Lippi. The Madonna and Child with 2 angels. And you can see this looks very Botticelli-esque. There is this wonderful continuity between master and apprentice, I find, between Filippo Lippi and Botticelli. The diaphanous, boy, I have trouble with that word. Diaphanous quality, that's good. Diaphanous quality of the veil here, and the delicacy of the halo, and that well, in this case, it's the Lippian kind of a profile of the female profile here, with that kind of high forehead, kind of like red blonde hair. very graceful expressions in both Fra Filippo Lippi and Botticelli. So the attention to the flow of kind of the drapery and flow of the hair, but then also the gestures of the hands. The fingers are very delicate. Look at the little curly hair of the little angels. This is one of Botticelli's religious paintings, Christian paintings, of the Madonna Magnificat. And this is a more regal setting than the Fra Filippo Lippi. I love that name. My students love that name too. Fra Filippo Lippi, Fra Filippo Lippi. That's one they always remember. But the connection, I think you can see, is very apparent between Filippo Lippi and Botticelli, and they're paired together in the Uffizi, and it's really, really wonderful to see some of Lippi's work paired with Botticelli. Botticelli also spent time in the studio of an artist named Verrocchio, and Verrocchio was famous for being the master, the teacher of Leonardo. And we think that Leonardo and Botticelli were probably working together in the studio of Verrocchio for a period of time. I railed about this during the last lecture about how it was kind of this moment in time where there were all of these artists kind of clustered together and they were kind of bumping elbows, and Brunelleschi was hanging out with Donatello and they were scurrying off to Rome together to hang out. And it was the same thing. So Botticelli is about 10 years older than Leonardo, but he was probably in the same studio learning from the same master at the same time. But took a completely different path from Leonardo, which we'll discuss. So Botticelli, the early part of his career are paintings like this. He's known as the painter of Madonnas. So just like Fra Filippo Lippi, these very kind of graceful and beautiful Madonnas, very contemplative, serenely beautiful, with their eyes downturned. But there's a slight shift in the mature part of his career, and he drifts towards mythological scenes, which are, of course, his most famous. Nobody cares, nobody remembers his religious works, and we'll talk about why. But everyone knows his mythological works, or The Birth of Venus. That's what Botticelli is known for. And so a couple of his early mythological works, we don't have many that survive, which I'll tell you why soon. But this is an early one, Pallas and the Centaur. That's also in the collection of the Uffizi. I won't linger on this one, but just to give you a sense of what's happening here, and you can start to see the Botticellian approach, or Botticellian depiction of the human body. Here we have Pallas, or Athena, and she's kind of garbed in, again, this kind of flowing, transparent robe, wreathed with kind of laurel. And she's grasping the hair of the centaur, who's kind of pulling away from her in submission, and is often read as the triumph of culture and learning over kind of unsophistication or the kind of violent side of nature. But in this is, like I said, it's an early mythological painting of his, but you can start to see what is that Botticellian approach. And what Botticelli is interested in is not so much the exact anatomical details. So he's veering away from what some in the Renaissance are pursuing as kind of very scientific approach to the human body and very anatomically correct depiction of the human body. So think about Leonardo's Vitruvian Man, right? So Leonardo is very, very interested in how the human body is working, and his attention to detail in the depiction of human anatomy is absolute. And the same thing with artists like Michelangelo and Raphael. But Botticelli is moving more in a poetical direction. And so he's interested in the curve of the female body. So he starts to elongate the forms. So there's always something, the women in his paintings are somehow otherworldly. So they're additional vertebrae. Their necks are too long, but he's much more interested in the curve of the neck. So it's a poetic approach to painting. And it's also a poetic approach to composition. So you'll find that his figures tend to float a bit in space. They almost look a little Gothic. I think maybe that was my reaction to them. I'm like, Botticelli is too Gothic. Things are too floaty. But he wants his bodies to appear weightless, whereas artists like Verrocchio and Leonardo, they're very much about grounding their figures within the space. But Botticelli's figures appear in the foreground. It's like a frieze. So if you think of Roman sculptures on a sarcophagus, or Roman sculptures on a wall, so like that kind of like relief sculpture, so that's kind of like wall decoration, right? So it's like that. It's like a relief, like a painting that's mimicking Roman relief. Let's not talk about this one. Oh boy. So this is Botticelli's Venus and Mars. So here we have, I won't talk about this one much because it's in the National Gallery in London, so you can go to Florence and see it. But I'll put it in here anyway because it's one of the few mythological paintings we do have. And I think it's a good kind of window into Botticelli's method. So here we have the reclining Venus, and this very beautiful white and gold robe. And there are little satyrs kind of parading around, playing with the war paraphernalia of the slumbering Mars, who is supine there on a kind of a pink or red blanket. Mars isn't wearing any clothing except for a kind of tastefully arranged white robe. He's very, very asleep, as we can see from the satyr blowing the shell right into his ear. She's awake, she's fine. So, I think we're looking at a post-coital scene here, I think, is apparent. And I just want you to think about this this is actually really a very sensual and a highly erotic painting, a scene that we're looking at. And it was read probably at the time as an allegory about the triumph of love and beauty over war and kind of a violence. And there was always in medieval and ancient Greek and Roman tradition this idea that a man could be subdued through strenuous sexual activity, but the woman would be fine. So there are kind of these two levels of meaning that we see here in this painting. But this is being created this is 1485, so this is in a Florentine society. This is a Christian society lifting a very erotic narrative from pagan mythology. And I just to place this in context, we're coming out of the medieval period where this is the mosaic in the Florence baptistry. We talked about that quite a bit, the baptistry. So this is from the late Gothic period, so the late medieval period. The fixation in the medieval period, so just 100, 200 years prior, was all about the heavenly world. And the human body was seen as a vessel for sin. So there was relatively little interest in the human experience on earth. It was about the experience of our soul in the afterlife. And in case we forgot it, God is always really big. You want to be on the good side of God. You don't want to be on the bad side. Don't mess up. Don't be caught in a post-coital, nap time with Mars. Or you might wind up here, being munched on by a blue devil. I really want to do a hell lecture series. I think that would just be so much fun. Anyway, there's some great medieval. Oh, it's great. Anyway, this is in the baptistry. Go into the baptistry so you can take a good look at the mosaic depiction of heaven and hell. Anyway, my point in showing this is that we're coming out of a highly suspicious and a highly sacred society where the fear for the eternity or fear for one's soul was paramount. And so something happened in the late 1300s and early 1400s that then allowed an artist like Botticelli to create work like this, right? Which is radically different from depictions of the Christian scenes, right? I mean, this is a remarkable departure. And there's a few reasons for that, and I talked about that in my last lecture, but just I'll recap really quickly. There was something really special happening in Florence. So the Renaissance really blossomed in Florence in the late 1300s and early 1400s. It lasted until about 1500, and then we have the High Renaissance really shifts to Rome and Venice a bit as well. But for about 150 years, Florence was really the center of this Renaissance, this rebirth of learning and a renewal of interest in Greek and Roman mythology and learning and culture. And there was a few things about Florence that made it happen there. The big one that I talked about last time was money. All the money was funneling directly into Florence. They were really, really good entrepreneurs and merchants. They had a thriving merchant class. They imported wool from England, and they were dealing in ostrich feathers, and I had a whole list there a few weeks ago. But anyway, they were the wheelers and dealers of the 1400s. And this, like I said, this incredible amount of money was flowing into the city, which was allowing them to embark on civic renewal. So they were building vast cathedrals and monuments like the Duomo here, redoing their city hall. We talked about that last time as well. That they had this belief in the city. So it was a republic, right? So they nominally a republic. We'll talk about that too. Why it's nominally a republic. But they had this idea. This Florentine pride was really something tangible. And they wanted their city to be the new Rome. They saw themselves as the inheritor to Roman greatness. And they had kind of this audacity. They thought they were the leaders of the new world. And they had a commission. They wanted to do a new fresco cycle in their city hall. And they hired Leonardo and Michelangelo. We're going to get the two best artists on the face of the earth at this moment. Two of them, not just one. Leonardo isn't good enough. We're going to get Leonardo and Michelangelo to do that. So money, but then also an interest in art and culture as well. It was an incredibly literate society. I think I talked about more than 70% of men in Florence, and a really sizable minority of women could actually read and had a facility with numbers. That was again because of all the money. They had to keep all of the books, right? You have to know where the money's coming and going and write contracts, so you have to have a basic capacity to communicate and manipulate numbers. There was I told the story last time, there was a survey done of the contents of a man's house he was a dyer, so he dyed cloth and wool. And this is a menial job, like this is not a learned profession at all. But in his house, he had works by Ovid and by Dante. So Joe Blow, cloth dyer, was reading Ovid and Dante. Like that's just, who are these people, these Florentines, right, in this time? So they had this wonderful curiosity about the world and an interest in art and culture and what it could say, what art could say about their city to the rest of the world. There were also these guys, you've probably heard of them, the Medici family, the original godfather. He really was. So this is Cosimo de Medici. He founded their fortune. The Medici fortune was founded on banking, and Cosimo amassed vast amount, like mind-boggling amounts of money. And they were the Medici family. The Medici clan was basically the de facto rulers of Florence. So it was kind of this odd. They were a new type of ruler, so they didn't come from any kind of long lineage or nobility. They made it up eventually. They're like, oh, we're descended from Augustus or whatever. Not true. They were nobodies, but they just came to power because of their, again, great wheeling and dealing power, or a facility for wheeling and dealing. And Cosimo and then the subsequent generations of the Medici family were thuggish about getting their people in power. They had no problem stuffing the ballot box. They had no problem killing off the families of their enemies. Their enemies were always trying to kill them too. Cosimo de' Medici, I started this sentence and I don't know where I'm going. Where was I saying about that? Cosimo de' Medici. Oh yes, that he was the godfather. Yeah. So he, there are 2,000 letters that remain that were written to Cosimo, and the majority of them are petitions for something. They're whining and asking for something in return, literally in return for a favor, like I come to you on the day of your daughter's whatever, right? It's that, and it's that tone, like I will owe you a favor, something, if you get this for me. He also had, Cosimo, and he kind of sets in place this system of the Medicis being arbiters of art and culture in Florence. And he had an interest in Greek and Latin texts and Greek and Latin learning, which really set the stage for the Florentine Renaissance. And there was one instance, there was a Renaissance poet and writer named Fincino, and Cosimo gave Fincino a farm. You have this farm, Fincino. All Fincino had to do was translate Plato and give it back to Cosimo. Like, what a great system. So Cosimo he's also called Cosimo il Vecchio, Cosimo the Elder. There was a son in between called Piero the Gouty, like gout as in Gouty, the father of Lorenzo. But he's the Piero the Gouty. I was about to say he was eclipsed by his son. Obviously he was eclipsed with a name like Piero the Gouty, eclipsed by his son Lorenzo the Magnificent. So you've probably heard of Lorenzo Medici. There's TV shows about him, and kind of part of our collective consciousness, I think, in the West, the Medici family and the Medici clan. You'll see this all over Florence. It's everywhere. Their coat of arms is the Medici coat of arms. It's red spheres or red balls on a gold background. They had their hands in everything, and they were master marketers. They were really, really good at putting their family crest everywhere. And one contemporary complained, this sounds so horrid to say. Anyway, one contemporary complained that the Medicis were even putting their balls in the privies. So once you see it in Florence, you'll see it everywhere. Check the privies. This is the Medici Palazzo. And to give you a sense of the Renaissance society, I mean, it's not, we think of, they're reading Ovid and Dante and a kind of this posh society. It was actually pretty, it was quite rough and tumble, so they were, it was much more like Romeo and Juliet, so kind of the roving bands of the Capulets and the Montagues. So their palazzos, their palaces, or their homes had to be set up like fortresses. So it was very impenetrable from the outside. It actually looks very imposing. I think Renaissance architecture is. I shouldn't say that. Renaissance architecture is bland, but then I shouldn't say. No, well, do I take that back? No, I'm gonna stick with it. I don't like Renaissance architecture. I prefer Baroque architecture, but that's fine. But it's just because they were trying not to get, stabbed in the streets. Anyway, so I guess it's utilitarian. That's better. I find Renaissance architecture utilitarian there. But then you would enter into the palazzo, in through the gates, and you would wind up in these beautiful courtyards. And they would be decorated with the Medici collection, and they were avid collectors. They were starting to dig up Greek and Roman sculptures all over the Mediterranean, and they were pulling them back to supplement their collection, and then also commissioning artists like Botticelli, we'll see soon, to augment their collection as well. This is the interior, the garden, the courtyard garden in the Medici Palazzo. They ran out of space at the Palazzo Medici, so they upgraded in the 1500s to the Palazzo Pitti, which is monstrously huge. It's on the other side of the Arno, so you cross the Ponte Vecchio and you're into the Palazzo Pitti. The Boboli Gardens, the famous Boboli Gardens, were in behind the Palazzo Pitti, and that was created by the Medicis as well. Featured in everyone's seen the Dan Brown movie, right? So they're like frolicking through the Boboli Gardens. I got in trouble last time because I said, don't bother going into the Pitti Palace. Their art collection sucks. And someone stopped me on Germain Street and said, yeah, I don't agree. They have a good collection. I was like, oh yeah, fight me. I'm ready. I'm fine. I can talk about this. They misidentify a Caravaggio. It was not a Caravaggio. Anyway, don't bother. Look at it from the outside. Anyway, my point is, the Medicis. This was their upgrade, okay, in their residence. And like I said, this is very, very fortress-like. Once again, so very, very imposing facade to Renaissance palazzos. And it was genuinely dangerous. So there was a conspiracy against the life of Lorenzo. And it's called the Pazzi conspiracy. So a rival family in Florence were trying to vie for power and authority were called the Pazzis. And they had this elaborate plan that they were going to assassinate Lorenzo on Easter Sunday. And they dressed up as clerics, as monks, and they kind of infiltrated the service at the Duomo. And Lorenzo and some of his family were taking communion, and they were kneeling. And then the Pazzis jumped out and stab. And but Lorenzo escaped barely, but his brother died. And Lorenzo's, the Medici kind of clan, clustered around Lorenzo and spirited him back to, not this place, back to the safety of the Palazzo Medici. Then they rallied the troops like a true padrone or true mob boss, and they slaughtered every Pazzi they could find. I think they killed 80-some people. Oh boy. One of those things we can laugh about because it was so long ago. And just to give you an example of the kind of wealth, the magnitude of wealth that we're dealing with the Medicis, and again, I think why they are so important to shaping the Renaissance and why the Renaissance happened here is just the magnitude of the money, which I'll try to articulate here and kind of show you what I mean. But essentially, it was this family. This family built Florence. So much money. They were the bankers to the papacy. Oh, and what I should also say too, what also kind of compelled them, is that in Christian faith, earning interest on the loaning of money, usury, is a sin. So the cardinals and the Pope knew they could really guilt trip the Medicis into building them a new church or refurbishing an existing church. And you might go to hell. You're loaning money, you're gaining interest. You better build us a new church. So there was that, coupled with the desire to augment their family name and stamp their crest everywhere. So this is San Lorenzo in Florence. Can I situate this for you? It's everything is close in Florence. It's a 2-minute walk away from the Duomo. It's a 2-minute walk away from the train station. There's a very kind of busy square just outside of San Lorenzo. It's one of the biggest and most important churches in Florence. It was also, luckily for San Lorenzo, the parish church for the Medici family. Medici's loved San Lorenzo, and they decided to completely redo the church. So this is, again, one of the most important churches in Christendom. One family, not connected with the church. This is not the papacy deciding to do this. This is a private family. We are going to redo completely this church. And they were looking for an architect to redo it. They thought, maybe we should get Brunelleschi. Since he did a really good job on the dome, maybe we'll get the best architect that has ever lived to work on the interior of San Lorenzo. So this is the interior of the church, all designed by Brunelleschi. Renaissance architecture it reminds you of classical Roman architecture. So it's very sparse, very elegant. There's lots of arches, clean spaces, very geometrically designed. So the opposite of Baroque architecture. I think I talked about Baroque architecture quite a bit in these classes. It was very opulent, very theatrical. Renaissance architecture is composed and very graceful. So they nabbed the biggest and best architect of the day to rebuild the San Lorenzo. Then they also need artists to decorate the interior, so they need a sculptural program. So let's get Donatello and Michelangelo. Sounds good. All right, so again, some of the best artists of the day to do the interior decoration. Oh, and if you can't get in, it's the lineup to get into the Duomo, so the big cathedral in Florence is monstrous, like absolutely monstrous. Like, don't bother going into the Duomo. You'll die waiting. So go to San Lorenzo instead for a really good example of a Renaissance interior. I think this one's actually better. Look at the dome from the outside. The dome from the outside is lovely. And then also they rebuild the cloister and this garden area, which is one of the most beautiful and contemplative garden spaces in Florence. Is truly remarkable. I would highly recommend anyone, if you're visiting Florence, put San Lorenzo on your list, because you can access this cloister with this very serenely designed. It's a really incredible space. And then the Medicis also decide, we need in this church, this parish church of theirs, we need the best and biggest and first public library that was ever amassed on Earth. So they create the Laurentian library, and you can go see it today. And it housed the most important works, Greek and Latin texts, and then also a text by Renaissance humanists. It was the largest collection that was held in one place, and it was public, a public collection. And so there would be there was a list of works that you could read that were spread out kind of in these little pews. And so then you would go along and be like, okay, Roman poets or Latin poets, and you go down Ovid. I want to read some Ovid, and then you go get the book and read some Ovid. Anyway, and then they also they commissioned Michelangelo to design the entrance to the biggest library there ever was. Like, it's incredible. Like this kind of audacity, or the vision that the Medicis had, and the amount of money that it took to facilitate that vision, and they had it. Like, they had that money in spades, right? And this was just one church. They redid essentially all of the churches in Florence. So when you're going and you're visiting, you're reading, and it's like, oh yes, recreated or rebuilt in the 1480s by the Medici family, or redesigned in the 1510s by the Medici family, and commissioned by the Medicis. It's just over and over and over again. The Patsis contribute once in a while. They have their own little chapels here and there. Thank you to the Patsis. So let's turn now to Botticelli. And why I talk so much about the Medicis is that the Medici family commissioned Botticelli's Primavera and Botticelli's Birth of Venus. And we're not exactly sure. There was a Medici clan, so we're not exactly sure. We think we know who had it and where it was, but it's not exactly sure. But anyway, essentially what you have to know is that the Medici family commissioned this work. And so Botticelli was part of the Medici circle of influence, hanging out with guys like Machiavelli, right? I mean, again, they were all there together. So let's take a look at Botticelli's Primavera. So Primavera means spring. And we have, it's a very linear composition again. All of the figures are clustered towards the foreground, so they're in the front of the painting. And we have it's a garden scene, right? So there are these flora and flowers and trees. It's kind of a dark space, very enclosed, like an orange grove. So I'll describe the figures from right to left. So in the far right, we have this floating blue figure here. And that's Zephyr, so it's a wind, the god of the winds. And his delightful story is that he's trying to catch up with Cloris, who is a virgin nymph, because he would like to rape her. And she is in the process of becoming Flora here, who is a goddess of eternal spring. And Flora has flowers and petals gathered in her robes, which she's strewing upon the ground. But Cloris is in again this diaphanous robe. Botticelli has a type, like a female type. So that kind of in the high nose, the high forehead, the eyes are situated high on the face, blue eyes, a dark blonde hair. And then on the left of the painting, the figure of Mercury is poking away a cloud that is threatening to enter the garden of Venus. So you can see it's really difficult to see, but there's this little cloud here in the top left, and Mercury is poking it away. Because I think it's a Roman poet, Claudian. Anyway, he wrote that there could be no clouds in the garden of Venus. So that was the kind of the poetic source for that. Keep the clouds at Mercury. And then there are these this is really, really charming set of three women intertwined. And these are the graces. And they're dancing in a circle, and their hands are clasped. And we can see this was a trope that was lifted actually from Seneca. Seneca described the three graces twirling about with their fingers intertwined. And artists loved this idea because it was a way to show the female body from three directions. So you could show you were really good at depicting the female form from every angle by depicting the three graces. So here, for instance, this is a Roman copy after a Greek original, but the same thing, this idea of the three women kind of intertwined or swirling about each other. But this is really, I think the Three Graces is really the star of this piece. I think it's so lovely, and the kind of like lyrical, like it's very you want to be part of this. Like it's so mind-numbingly beautiful that it's a poem. It's like Midsummer Night's Dream, right? We want to enter into this garden. We want to be twirling about with the Three Graces. There's something ethereal and otherworldly about their beauty and the gracefulness of their poses and the way that their fingers intertwine, that kind of lovely linearity, and then their flowing, curling hair. And then of course in the center we have the figure of Venus. Oh, there's Cupid also. Cupid up at the top with the blindfold. And I love his expression. He's very serious, kind of expression as he pulls back his arrow, flaming arrow, ready to strike one of the poor Graces. But here in the center of the garden is really actually quite an enigmatic figure. And she's identified, she's not identified in the title. The title of the painting is Primavera, but we read it as Venus. This is probably Venus's garden. But she's wearing this is a matrimonial, like a wedding headdress, or like a headdress of a Tuscan wife. So she has more of a matronly approach or attitude rather than one of sensuality or beauty. And here again we have that Botticellian approach that her body is far too long, right? There's her arms. Look at her arms, you know. And they're extremely long, and her neck as well. But it's that serpentine curve. So it's that reverse S curve here that's happening. That he cares more about the poetic nature of the contours of her body so much more than the anatomical correctness. And she's raising her hand in a gesture of benediction and of welcome. So it's a very positive, kind of a welcoming space. And she is looking at us. She's gazing out at the viewer, like inviting us into the garden. Notice too that there is the way the trees are structured in behind Venus. It forms a bit of an apse or a halo, right? So there is this. We'll see this with the birth of Venus too. But there's overlapping allegorical meanings. So it's more than just Venus in the garden. Like this can be read as almost as the Madonna and kind of the beauty and the gracefulness of the Madonna figure or the Virgin Mary figure is here. And that was what was happening in the Renaissance, is that they didn't see the distinction. There didn't have to be. They didn't want there to be a distinction between Greek and Roman mythology, Greek and Roman thinking, and the Christian narrative. They were working to combine the two. So we see that it's actually quite a complicated allegorical system of messages that's happening here. So this is a pagan scene, it's a mythological scene, but there is a Christian symbols and Christian messaging also at play here. And what you can really see now when you go to the Uffizi, I think thanks to the lighting job, the lighting tech, Caleb, is the wonderful amount of detail. Again, it's almost like a northern Renaissance painting. That this amount of detail. There are 42 different types of flowers and various greenery from the Tuscan springtime. So the Medici family, whoever the audience was, would have recognized the spring-like landscape from their own rambles about the countryside, and it glows with these colors, and again that tempera paint, and the amount of detail. Look at the detail on the cloth. Like it's a painting that's meant to be looked at and digested very, very slowly in kind of this private space. But what I'd like you to notice is that just like what I was talking about with Pallas and the Centaur, the figures are all they're in the front. So there's very little interest. Botticelli wasn't so much interested in the landscape. You can see there's a little bit of landscape in behind here, but that wasn't something like a realistic depiction of a realistic world did not drive his practice or his vision. Leonardo maybe didn't think so much of his 10-year-older senior artist. He said that Botticelli made up his landscapes by throwing sponges at the canvas and then just would turn those forms into landscapes. Botticelli's like, yes, that sounds fine, that sounds reasonable. But again, more interested in these three graces and kind of the beauty of their gestures. And kind of the sensuality of their forms, and notice too that they're almost hovering, so they're appearing weightless in this space. see, yes, here Venus is raising her right hand in kind of this gesture of welcome or blessing. And we see that again and again in Christian art too. That's why I included this, that Christ is always kind of raising his right hand as a gesture of blessing. And that pose of the Virgin Mary, that kind of very serene-like pose where she is looking at the audience, is I think echoed in Botticelli's work. So let's talk now about the birth of Venus. I think probably his most famous work. So just a few years after, again curated for the Medici family. It's a slightly simpler narrative here, or fewer figures to decipher. So on the left this time, we have another figure of the wind, and his I was going to say accomplice. Is that the right word? Accompanying figure. Anyway, and then we have a Venus in the center, and she is about to be robed by the waiting hour. So it's her attendant, hour with a capital H. And the story of Venus, as was that Botticelli is choosing to depict here, is that Venus is born. Somehow the severed genitals of Uranus land in the ocean, and Venus springs forth, fully formed as an adult, and she is blown to shore on an enormous seashell by Zephyr. Ta-da. So here she is. And it's similar to the composition of the Primavera, so all of the figures are in the foreground here. Botticelli doesn't care about the representation of the water. He depicts waves as little V's. I think this is so funny. Little V's of water. Leonardo would have a stroke. And again, not so hung up on anatomical details. Notice the legs. Wait a minute. 1, 2, 3. Is there an extra? No, there isn't an extra. Who knows whose leg is which, but you can see there's something wonky going on with these bodies here and the intertwining legs. In real life, they don't quite function like that. But then again, we're not in the realm of the real, right? Like Botticelli is depicting an idea. It's a dream. It's a poem. And his figure of Venus is really the most exaggerated of his mature style. Here she has an enormously elongated torso and a very long neck, and nobody has hair that long. But she is the embodiment. So this is Venus as the embodiment of everything beautiful and everything graceful about the female body. And interestingly, she's assuming a position of modesty. So this is not a sexualized or a sensualized Venus. So she is attempting to cover her nakedness as she's wafted to shore, and she's about to be robed. So this is Venus Pudica. This is Venus as a modest Venus. And this idea was. Wait a minute. There we go. This is from a Roman. This is a Greek and Roman idea of the modest Venus, Venus Pudica. So this Venus on the left was actually part of the Medici collection, so it's known as the Medici Venus. And it's the same. She's attempting to cover herself. And why I have these pieces here. So this painting, this is really something. Again, we look at it from our contemporary perspective. And we're like, yes, it's another naked woman. But this was something remarkably new and remarkably transgressive for the time. And it was as if the Greek and Roman gods, or Greek and Roman mythology, Greek and Roman ideas, had been slumbering for 1,000 years, and Botticelli allows them to re-enter the world on this grand scale for the first time. So even artists like Leonardo and Michelangelo and Donatello, they're Michelangelo, we'll talk about Michelangelo soon, he's depicting David, right? So this is still a Judeo-Christian figure. Botticelli is one of the first artists to really pull out these mythological figures from the past. And Ficino, that same Renaissance writer, who he was given the farm by Cosimo de' Medici, right, for translating Plato. So Ficino wrote about the birth of Venus, and he said that the birth of Venus was an allegory for the birth of beauty in the minds of humanity. That we were reawakened to the idea of beauty that had been sleeping for 1,000 years. And the idea of a nude figure, that nudity was something different from nakedness, that even though she is appearing in modesty, she's attempting to cover herself up, but we are meant to reflect on the beauty of her body. As opposed to medieval depictions of female nakedness. So this is very much, this is the female body naked as opposed to the female body nude. And this is generally, if there was any depictions for 1,000 years of the female form, it was generally Eve attempting to cover herself up as she's being dispelled from the Garden of Eden. And this is the same thing here. So this is Eve Eve as being distraught or being very distressed. And that her nudity is something, that there's an ashamedness rather than a modesty, really, to the nakedness of her body. So this is something truly, truly radical and different, and it must have been transcendent and really revelatory for the audience at the time. There are, where do I have that? There we go. There's actual gold, like leaf or gold strands woven into the hair of the Venus figure here. And it's something, again, you can see now. I was always looking before, I'm like, there's supposed to be gold in there, but I can't see it. But you can actually see it now, like it just glows in this new Uffizi renovation. No, go back to that again. Oh yes, and so I talk about, over and over again, you'll read about Botticelli as being the poetical master of linearity and the beauty of Botticelli's line. And like, what does that mean? Like these art historians, we always say, oh, linearity and the line. I remember being with a professor the first time I was in Rome and Florence, and it was like, but the line, the serpentine line, and we were all like, what does that mean? I mean, we get it, we get what a line is, but it's like linearity. Anyway, so I will explain linearity to you here now. Linearity basically is when the forms, right? So like say her face or her neck or her body is separated from what comes outside of it by a line, okay? So there is this actual line that you can see, right? And it's a very smooth, very flowing, graceful line that we have. And that's partly due to Botticelli's style, but then also due to the restrictions of the medium. So he's painting with, like I said, with tempera paint, which is a very difficult kind of paint to blend, to get kind of gradations of color and of shading. In real life is not like this, right? Like real life, lines are often obfuscated by shadow, right? That shadow, things recede into shadow and we can't tell where something ends and something begins. There is no black line around anyone, right? So it's a anti-scientific, or it's an anti-optical approach. Whereas what Leonardo was experimenting with is really the opposite. He's modeling, so he's giving form to the figures through gradations of shadow. And so comparing, for instance, the Mona Lisa, the face of the Mona Lisa, there is no line, right? It's created through shadow. And so we see the forms of her face. And Leonardo is experimenting with oil paint, and that's something you can achieve with oil paint. It's this very, very gradual gradation of changing from light to dark, so shading essentially. And he called this technique, it was called a sfumato. So like smoke is the technique here that we see with the face. And so we don't know where is the edge of her cheek and where does her hair begin. But it's because it's in shadow. We can't access it. We can't see it. And that's really more true to life. It gives it kind of a rounded appearance as opposed to Botticelli's approach. What I also want to point out, and I talk about this so much, you'll all be contrapposto experts, but Botticelli is magnificently lifting. You can see this with all of Botticelli's female figures. And point this out when you go to the magnificent contrapposto pose. Botticelli's magnificent contrapposto. So what this is, here we have the weight of the leg of Venus. Her weight is on her left leg. And her right leg is essentially weightless. It's about to move. And what happens when a figure is moved into contrapposto pose? Contrapposto is counterpose. Is that then the hips tilt one way, and the shoulders tilt another, and then the head tends to either tilt on its axis or spin. So it's a much more naturalistic pose. And it did not appear at all in the medieval era. It was very, they were flattened figures. It wasn't important to the narrative. But the Greek and Roman artists loved contrapposto. Look at this weight exclusively almost on this Venus's right leg, and then her knee protrudes, and then look at the tilt this way, and then this way, and then her head can turn. Contrapposto, there we go. But all of Botticelli's women are assuming that pose, and that's very much a way to identify if you're walking through the Uffizi, if you're walking through the Louvre or one of these big art museums, and you're looking at that transition from the medieval period or the Gothic period into the Renaissance. That's something that you'll pick up on, is this more naturalistic pose. And I try to think about the way that the human body is posed that can change, or it would become more naturalistic. But women do the contrapposto pose much better than men. We have bigger hips. Oh boy, look at that curve. Yes. So it's always slightly exaggerated with Botticelli's figures. Like again, the weight distribution here, she'll tip over this way. It's not exactly true to life or realistic. It's an exaggerated contrapposto pose. But again, it's about what can happen to the female body when it's tilted that way. And so what happens to Botticelli is that he gradually kind of falls into obscurity, and he doesn't paint much for the final decade or so of his life. Sadly, so we have these magnificent examples of mythological scenes from him, but he switches back to doing very kind of strange and end of times and apocalyptic religious scenes, because he becomes a follower of this guy, Savonarola, who I will discuss. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Savonarola tonight as a bit of a teaser to convince you to come to next week's lecture. I'll just tell you enough. So Savonarola was a radical monk based in the convent of San Marco, and he attracted to him an incredible audience of followers. His sermons became so popular he had to move out of San Marco and do sermons at the Duomo, so thousands and thousands of followers. And he basically seized political control from the Medici. So the Medicis were essentially chased out of the city. And he preached. It was hell and fire and brimstone and the end of time and the end of the world, but could galvanize this crowd. And he had there were roving bands of children who would run around the city, gathering up what they called vanities, so extravagant clothing, or mirrors, or jewelry, or again, just anything that was related to a surplus or to one's vanity, right? And there was famously a bonfire of the vanities in the Piazza della Signoria. This is this main town square. And the story is, so Botticelli and not Botticelli, Savonarola and his roving bands of terrifying children, that must have been bonkers, right? Like, little evil kids running around stealing all your stuff. Anyway, they had a bonfire of the vanities in the Piazza della Signoria, and the story is that Botticelli burned some of his own paintings on the bonfire. Botticelli became a follower of Savonarola and an active believer in this end of times religiosity. Savonarola went a little too far. The Pope excommunicated Savonarola. Savonarola tried to excommunicate the Pope. The Florentines didn't really like this burning of the vanities because they really liked their vanities. So eventually they burned Savonarola in the same place as the bonfire of the vanities. All the Florentines, they're so smart. So here's actually, they hanged him until he was nearly dead, and then they burned him, just for good measure. But again, we can laugh about it. So this is one of it's so bizarre and creepy. Anyway, it's one of Botticelli's late works, and I won't get into detail, but it's very kind of mystical and again has lots of kind of doom and apocalyptic meanings happening. And with the reign of Savonarola, Michelangelo left. Like, I am out. Michelangelo went to Rome, and he wasn't getting sucked in to Savonarola's New World. But really, with the reign of Savonarola and the expulsion of the Medicis came back, but it was really the end of the Florentine Renaissance, and the artistic center of the Renaissance shifts then to Rome. And with the Pope, we talked about Pope Julius II and Michelangelo and Raphael really begin to work more in Rome. And Florence is never quite the same. And Botticelli actually descends into obscurity for a number of centuries. We forgot about Botticelli, and he remained really unpopular until the pre-Raphaelites. So into the 1800s, you think of artists like Rossetti. Like the Lady of Shalott, Waterhouse. Anyway, so he became popular again just within the last 100 or 200 years. So up next, if you liked talking about Savonarola, we will talk a whole heap more about Savonarola next week, and his monastery at San Marco, and more about the bonfire of the vanities and his religiosity. And we'll also talk about, this is my favorite art space in Florence, the San Marco Monastery, and then the fresco cycle by Fra Angelico. Nobody knows who Fra Angelico is, but I'm telling you, you'll love him. Come next week, you'll love him. And then after that, at the end of the summer, we'll wind up, of course, with Michelangelo's David. And so that's it for the evening. Again, our lectures are all posted online. Our donation bucket is at the front. Oh, and Caleb, we had some questions also if we accept donation by credit card. Yes, absolutely we do. And you can see Caleb about that. And yes, and again, thank you so much for coming, and hopefully I'll see you next week for Fra Angelico and more Savonarola.